Good morning, good afternoon Year 10 and welcome to the second video lesson for Inspector Goule's GCSE English Literature. Now our topic for this lesson is Inspector Goole. So we're going to go through a series of tasks to try and understand why he's in the play, what his purpose is, how Priestley presents his character, some quotations. We're going to look at his final speech, just so you can understand a little bit more behind the character, because as we sort of focused on last week, and hopefully as you learned with Mrs. Berlin, every character that Priestley places and creates to go in the play is done so with a purpose and with a reason. It's not simply just he's in there just to make things exciting. There's a lot more to it than that. I'm not going to talk through this again because it's the same as last time, but the overall idea is that if you see the pause button, I'd encourage you to pause and make some notes and do the task. If you see the fast forward button, it's because you've already done that previously in school or on Microsoft Teams, so you don't need to do that task, but you can have a look at it if you want some more information. And if you have any questions during the video, you can pause it, minimize the YouTube screen, and email your teacher or post on the Microsoft Teams page, and we will do our best to answer your questions. So what we're going to do first is it's very, very similar to the structure that you followed already. In order for us to be in a position where we can analyse and write about Inspector Goole, we must go through the following steps. Step 1, we're going to do the mind map just to have a bit of a recap on what you know already, identify what gaps you might have. Then we're going to look at vocabulary and quotations. Then we're going to look at the analysis of those quotations, and then we're going to bring them together into a bit of an essay-style paragraph, a bit of an analysis, modelling up from grade 1 to grade 9 like last time. And at the end, I'll give you a bit of information in terms of a revision document. Okay, so on here you've got a reminder of the plot. If you need it, you can click this link, YouTube, and in the search bar in Inspector Goule's play. For example, you have lots of different versions, but as I said before, just be mindful that sometimes the versions might differ slightly from what you've read in class. So if that does happen, just query it or ask your teacher if you need a bit of help with that. Otherwise, one thing I forgot to say there was the BBC Bite-Size website does have a plot overview and will talk you through each act if you need it. Okay, so first task, what do you already know about Inspector Goole? So in a second I'd like you to pause the video, and what I'd like you to do is do a bit of a mind map on what you can remember about Inspector Goole. At the bottom there's some prompts for you to help you with that, so you could write down some quotations, you could focus on how he sympathises with Eva Smith's situation, you could look at how he addresses the Berlins and what language he uses and what he tries to get them to do. You could look at his view of responsibility, and you could look at him as a character that embodies and represents socialism. Okay, so pause the video now and have a go at task 1, please. Okay, so for task 1, these are the kind of things you might have said. Those are some adjectives that you could use to describe Inspector Goole, and also some ideas at the bottom in terms of what his character is like. And I've also included some quotations on here. This isn't mine, by the way. I'm not that good a drawer. I've taken this off the internet. However, it's useful to look at the kind of ideas that you could have come up with. So moral, accusatory, enigmatic, and so on. So although it doesn't necessarily have any analysis on it, it has quotes and it has adjectives. The other example I found was this. This is slightly more geared towards students looking at grades 6 to 9 because of the kind of terminology it uses. But again, you've got quotations, you've got ideas, and you've almost got like 4 points that you could make about the inspector. So if you want to pause now, you can have a look at that and add any notes, and you can have a look at that and add any notes that you need to your mind map. Okay, so just before we move on, a bit of a recap here. You have got a video here from Mr. Brough, if you need it, which talks through Inspector Goole as a character. But I've also put here a bit of information on what he does in the play, and what his purpose is in the play. This is taken from BBC Bitesize, and I've edited it slightly, but hopefully it's clear enough that if you're thinking, actually I can't remember what Inspector Goole is like, or I can't remember much about his character, then have a quick read of this. If you feel confident already with the character of Inspector Goole, you can click the fast forward button and you can skip this slide. Okay, so task 2. Now, what I've done here, based on feedback from some students in 10A1, is I have merged these tasks together. So, down the left, you've got some vocabulary relating to Inspector Goole. Then you've got a space to add a definition. Then you've got space to add a quotation. And then at the end, you have to focus on what the quotation could show and how it could support the idea in the first column. Now, I've already put in the quotations down the middle because I'm conscious of the fact that you might not have a copy of the play to access. So I've put the quotes down the middle. So what you need to do is look at the key vocabulary down the left-hand side, find a definition that you're happy with in your own words, and then fill in the far right column to explain what that quotation suggests and how it supports the keyword at the start. Okay, you want to spend about 15 minutes on that, and you can start that now. Okay, now I haven't given answers for those because I know that your teachers will look at them and give you feedback anyway. But we will come on to these ideas a little bit later. Generally, it should have been pretty straightforward. You've looked at the word, for example, imposing. You've provided a definition for it, and then the quote, an impression of massiveness, solidity, and purposefulness. Hopefully, you've picked up on the fact that it makes the inspector seem like a central character. It makes him seem intimidating. The fact that he's there with purposefulness makes it seem as if he's there with the intention of getting the Burlings to reveal what they've done to Eva Smith and so on. So don't worry too much about the ideas on there because your teachers will check them. But hopefully that was enough for you to sort of get a bit of an idea, first of all, as to what Inspector Goole is about. Now, I am aware that the screen, that you couldn't see the top of the screen. So I'm just going to go back a little bit so you can see the top of every screen. I do apologise for that. It was a mistake on my part. I made the screen too big, so it wasn't easy to see. But hopefully that should be a lot better. Make that more central. Okay. So before we move on to the next task, there's just a bit of context for you to just look through. And I'm not going to read this out to you, but I'd like you to read it on your own and pause the video and make any notes that you need to. The bottom line, though, here is the second bit. So Inspector Goole is a device. He's a dramatic device. Characters are devices. Okay? And essentially what Priestley does is he uses the inspector to encourage and guide the audience to question their own behaviour in the same way that Inspector Goole asks questions of the Burlings. It's almost like Priestley wants us to ask the questions that he asks, but to ourselves, so that we can develop and change our own behaviour and be aware of the consequences of our actions. And there's lots of reasons as to why Inspector Goole is in the play, but that is one of them. So if you pause this slide now, you can make and add any notes that you need to. Okay, welcome back. This is just a quick slide about Priestley and socialism. Okay, now again, I'm not going to read through all of these. The information's there on the slide for you. But some really important things that we just need to be aware of. Okay, Priestley was a socialist. Priestley was interested in responsibility. He was interested in a fair society. He was interested in other people sharing responsibility for others. Okay, he disliked the kind of Mr. Burling attitude. A man should look after himself and his family. Priestley thought that there was more to that. A man should not just look after himself and his family. He should look after the others around him. So that, in essence, he wanted people to take care of each other and share a responsibility. Okay, Priestley himself did fight in World War I, so he knew what it was like to suffer. Okay, he knew what it was like to have to go on the front line. He knew what war could do to people. Okay, he was badly injured himself in World War One when I believe a trench collapsed on him. So actually, he knew what it was like to go to war and to be injured and to suffer. He disagreed with war as a solution to problems. Don't forget as well, this was on last week's slide, but there was no benefit system which we call welfare state in 1912. If you were poor or you were struggling for money, you had to go to charities, you had to go to the church. You couldn't phone up HMRC or the Department for Work and Pensions. You couldn't phone them up and explain your situation and be entitled to benefits because it didn't exist. So it's really important just to remember that Priestley was asking people to take responsibility, reflecting on a time in 1912 when there was no such benefit system or welfare state. The last point, Priestley wanted to shine a light on the issue of social responsibility. This is quite important because what we've got to remember is that the play was set the play was set in 1912, but the play was written and first performed in 1946 in the UK, which was straight after World War II. So at the point when the play was performed on stage, the audience will have just gone through the atrocities of World War II. You know, they might have lost loved ones, they might have lost family members, they might have lost even their house. If there was any damage done during any sort of bombings, they would have just been on rations. They might have not seen family members for a few years whilst they were fighting on the front line. So there was lots of sacrifices that people had to make. Okay. And essentially, after the war, the quality of life was really poor. Priestley, essentially what he wanted to do is he wanted to show people that actually, this is what the war's done. It's brought us together as a community. It's brought us together as a society. And Priestley did not want us to lose that. He wanted people to keep in their minds this idea that we're all in this together for the future, not just during the war. You can pause now if you want to and make some notes on this slide, or if you want to read in a bit more detail. Okay, so we're on to step 3, which is where we're going to look at some quotations. Now, this is a very long quotation, and in an exam you wouldn't need to know all of this. Although actually, there's quite a lot in here that you could say about this, so you might decide you want to learn 2 or 3 points and quotes from this example. But what we're going to do is we're going to unpick this first of all. We're going to see what we can say about these quotations. I'm going to do one as an example, first of all. Then I'm going to pause it and let you do it. And then, if I just go on a little bit, we're going to have a go at putting it together into a paragraph. So, what I'll do is I'll just pause the video, swap my screen over so that I can type, and then I'll come back. So here we're looking at context, Priestley's intentions, any language or word level analysis, and you can also have a look at the vocabulary that you learn here to try and apply it to this speech. So I'm going to go to the next slide and move that. So what I might do first of all is I'll take it in the order in which it appears, yeah, and I will start with "But remember this." Now what you've got to remember is that after this the inspector leaves. So this is the inspector's final speech, and it's written in such a way where it's supposed to be dramatic. The audience on stage will have felt the presence of the inspector, and the audience on stage will be aware of when we were introduced to the inspector at the start with this idea of massiveness, solidity and purposefulness. The audience will feel this come to a peak, a climax at this point in the play. And as the inspector says goodnight here, he then leaves and goes, and this remains. And this remains. So you've got to kind of consider it as a dramatic device, this speech. Okay, so what we're going to look at first is we're going to look at "But just remember this." That's also from a Take That song, actually. But another lesson for another day. So what you might start with is we're going to do the same thing that we did with Mrs. Berlin. We're going to try and annotate these for ideas. Okay, so Priest's use of. Now we know that is an imperative. Remember, do, think, speak, sit down. They're imperative. They tell us to do something. In primary school, they might have referred to them as bossy verbs. So essentially, the imperative is it's telling the audience to do something. Not the audience, sorry, it's telling the Berlins to do something here because this is directed to the family. So Priest's use of the imperative, remember this, suggests that the inspector is not only guiding but almost forcing the Berlins to heed his warning message. That's probably not the best word to understand, we could say. Priest's use of the imperative, remember this, suggests that the inspector is not only guiding but almost forcing the Berlins to understand his warning message, that if they will not learn from their mistakes, then they will be doomed. Okay, so just I've gone a bit too quickly there, but just to recap, the whole point of this speech is that the inspector is telling the Berlins that we're all in this together, we all share responsibility, and if you don't share responsibility and if you continue to be selfish and behave in the way that you've always behaved, then what will happen is you will be doomed. Fire, blood and anguish and so on. Okay. Priest's use of the imperative, remember this, colour code that so we know that there's evidence in there, suggests the inspector is not only guiding but almost forcing the Berlins to understand his warning message, that if they will not learn from their mistakes. When you tell someone to remember something, you're almost suggesting that they have done it before and that they just need a reminder. The use of remember functions as a kind of reminder. Let's not say a kind of, actually, as a strong reminder to the Berlins that their actions have consequences. Okay. Furthermore, the fact that Priestley begins the inspector's final speech, with "but," it's almost as if what he's saying is, if you remember anything from my appearance here, remember this. He's kind of saying, like, it's almost like contradicting what the Berlins have tried to defend themselves. Almost it's not really contradicts, is it? Almost opposes what the Berlins. That's not really what I want to say, is it? Furthermore, the fact that Priestley begins. See, this is difficult. I will, I've taught this play for 5 years now, and it is difficult. So, obviously, when you're writing these out, don't be afraid to delete what you've put and go back over it again and change the idea. You'll probably find that there's 2 or 3 ideas for each part of this quote. This speech. So don't worry too much if you find, actually, I'm not really going anywhere with this, so I'm going to backtrack a little bit. The fact that Priestley gives the inspector's final speech with "but" almost. So what I'm going to make, the point I'm going to make is almost foregrounds what the inspector is about to say. Regardless of what has happened, regardless of their actions towards Peter Smith, it is paramount that they remember and listen to the message he is about to give. And at this point, you might bring in some of the ideas about socialism or about context. Priestley uses the inspector as a vehicle for socialism. inspector performs the function of a, and you might want to go back to some of the ideas from your mind map here if you've got them. We have a look on here. Priestley's mouthpiece, the personification of Priestley's socialist views. So you might go back to here and you might put the inspector personifies Priestley's socialist views. In fact, we've just put that, so let's take that off. We can use that for a different, copy that out a little bit later. Priestley uses the inspector as a vehicle for socialism. The inspector is a stark reminder of our need to take collective. Now that as a paragraph isn't fantastic. Okay, it misses out a few things. However, we're not on the paragraph stage at the moment. We're on the annotation stage. And your annotations do not have to be perfect because they're just starting points. Okay, so I've done that. What I'd like you to do is to take that, copy over the pause so that we know to pause. Take this as a starting point, okay, this bit here. And then what I'd like you to do is go through the rest of this. As you can see, I've underlined the bits you could focus on, but the thing is, there's so much to focus on. What's happened there? Unless I'm 25 language, good night. There's so much to focus on that actually you don't have to do it all. Okay, so I'll put that back there. If you pause for about 15 minutes or so, have a go at annotating the quotation, the speech for different ideas that you could explore. And as I put at the bottom, that does include zooming in on individual words, considering characters' attitudes, thinking about why Priestley's included the inspector, looking at context in 1912, and thinking about context in 1946 as well. You can pause now. Okay, so hopefully that is you managed to do that task. I'm not going to go through all the things you could have said because I'm going to show you in a minute what you can do with those things. Now, if you're struggling, what I would say is, because what I've tried to do is that I don't want to just copy what Mr. Brough has done because it's not useful. But if you're really struggling, there's that video there, which is Mr. Brough's explanation of Inspector Goole. You might want to look at that before, if you are struggling. Only because I don't want to make a video that just does exactly the same as what Mr. Brough does, because that's just a waste of my time. It's a waste of your time. So this video is going to talk you through our own school, the way that we use Perl at school. But if you're thinking, actually, I'm not really sure about this speech, I need a bit more help, that video will give you that help. So we're going to have a look at using this to bring this together into a paragraph. Okay, we don't need 10 minutes to look at that, so I'll get rid of that. So in essence, and that should be step 4, I apologise, not step 54. Oops. In essence, we're going to have a go at putting this together in a paragraph like we did last week with Mrs. Berlin. Okay. Now, there's a few sort of pointers that we have to follow when we're doing this. Okay. We need to make sure that the quotations are analysed in detail. We need to make sure that we've shown an understanding of Inspector Goole. We need to include an explanation of why Priestley uses Inspector Goole and what he's there for. You know all this: word, zoom, context, audience. Perhaps the most important thing, you must show that you've understood that the inspector is a conscious construct. Okay, he is constructed by Priestley. Inspector Goole is not real. Okay, he was not a real inspector. Don't get into the habit in the exam of talking about him like you know him personally, because you don't. Okay, he's not your mate. You don't know him. He wasn't real. Okay, he was a character in a play. He's fictional, right? But we'll get onto that a little bit later. Priestley uses him in the play as a device. He's used to shine a light on the selfishness of the upper classes and inspect their actions. Okay, that's one of the reasons. There are many more, but that's a good starting point. Okay, so let's get cracking. We're going to have a look at this quotation here, and what we're going to do is we are going to unpick a little bit about what that suggests. But we're going to be working at a reasonably low level at the minute, at grade 1 or grade 2. Okay, so we're going to start off at grade 1. We're going to walk all the way up to grade 9, like we did with the Mrs. Berlin work last week. Okay, it might be helpful to I'll include this on the slide for you, but it might be helpful for you to, if you didn't manage to annotate that when you did this bit, which is here, oops, then you might want to have a go at that now. Okay, if you don't want to, and if you think actually I'm just going to listen to the explanation first, that's completely fine. Okay, so we're going to start with, we don't live alone, we are members of one body, we are responsible for each other. Okay, so hopefully on this what you've noticed is that we is repeated 3 times here. Okay, we is inclusive language. Okay, it doesn't mean you, it doesn't mean I, it means us, it means we. Okay, in his final speech, in fact at this level we don't need to show that we know what Priestley, that we know that the Priestley's doing it deliberately actually. The inspector states that we don't live alone, we are members of one body. Sorry. You've got a point. We haven't got a point yet. You might say something relatively basic. Priestley presents the inspector as a socialist, for example. In his final speech, the inspector states that we don't live alone, we are members of one body. This suggests that the inspector wants us to take a shared responsibility for everybody in society, because he uses the word we to make it seem like we are all the same, that we share. If you say, like, for example, we are people, we all share the qualities that we are people. We all share the same quality and many similarities. So this is probably around, you know, a grade 1, possibly a high grade 1. So what you've done is you've got a quotation here, and you've made a point about what it suggests, and you've also got some word zoom there. Okay, so relatively basic. So then when we go on to the grade 3 and 4, make that a bit bigger. So we've gone to the grade 4. We need to just tighten this up a little bit. Okay, Priestley presents the inspector as a socialist and uses him as a mouthpiece for his own socialist views. In his final speech, the inspector states that we don't live alone, we are members of one body. Now here we need to be more specific, so rather than just saying this suggests, we need to pick out exactly what it is that it suggests. The use of we, which is inclusive language, so we get a little bit more specific here, suggests, we can carry on with this, suggests that the inspector wants us to take a shared responsibility for everybody in society. So rather than saying he uses, the inspector uses, because the inspector's a character, the use of the word we makes it seem like we are all the same and like we share the same quality and many similarities. Okay, so what we're missing here, if we go back, is we're missing an audience response. We're missing link to Priestley's intentions. Okay, up a little bit. Priestley writes the inspector's final speech in this way to guide the audience into to identify with his socialist views. Okay, so essentially what he wants to do is he wants the audience to listen to this and think, yes, okay, I agree, we don't live alone, we are all members of one body and we are responsible for each other. Okay, now you might use another bit of the quotation to help you here. Priestley writes the inspector's final speech in this way to guide the audience into identifying with his socialist views. Okay, he speaks on behalf of the audience using we to. So what we does is he's able to align himself with a post-war post-war 1946 audience. So the point I'm trying to make here is that in 1946, socialism was on the up. So it was something that people bought into. It was something that people believed in. So essentially, Priestley is able to reinforce a common message at the time. Priestley writes in Inspector's final speech in this way to guide the audience into identifying with the socialist views. He speaks on behalf of the audience using we to align himself. If I would change that to them, post-war audience. He's able to make use of the and capitalize on the audiences. So essentially what I'm saying here is that Priestley made the inspector in such a way to guide the audience to identify with his socialist views. Okay, the audience were in post-war 1946. What Priestley is able to do is he's able to use the inspector at a time when when people believed in socialism and there was more support for it than what there was previously. Okay, so he's able to make use of the increase in support for socialism after the war and capitalise on the audience's potential to want to change and rebuild a better, fair Britain. And if I go back and have a little look, context we've just got, we've just got language zoom. Okay, so we've got we've got essentially the bits of the pearl that we need, which is sufficient for a grade 4. Yeah, if the paragraphs were like this all the way through, you'd be looking at giving the student, a grade 4 because they've understood that the character isn't real. They've understood that the war was part of the influence, and they have mentioned some key language to talk about it. Okay, so that's our grade 3 to 4 response. So then what I'm going to do is, as I did last time, I'm going to copy this over. And we're going to have a look at it in terms of grade. We'll aim for a grade 6, right? So largely we can keep what we've got, really. Just double check. Colour code that. And I might go here with a furthermore, just to add an extra layer of, it's a little bit wider, an extra layer of detail here. Furthermore, Priestley's use of, we are of one body, so I've gone to a different part of the quote. I'm evaluating, I'm saying it's particularly powerful because what he's done here is like we're not members of one body. It's impossible. Okay, because we're all individuals. So what he's saying is he's saying that society is one body. Okay, that we're one big person together. Because it is as if Priestley is saying or suggesting or implying Now, what would be really interesting about this is if you had just had a bit of a think, actually, here now, a bit of a think to try and work out, we are members of one body. If you think about a body that functions, you can't have a functioning body if you don't have every piece of the body working together. So I'm here sitting at a desk doing this video for you, and at the same time my brain is communicating with my mouth, which is communicating with my arms, because although I'm not on video, I'm using my arms still to explain things to you, because that's just what I do. And all of this is happening at the same time, so we're all dependent on, our bodies are all dependent on each individual organ, and you can't do one thing without needing another part of the body to help you, if that makes sense. So everything in the body is interdependent, we say. You can't do one thing without the other. You can't stand up with one leg. You need both legs to do it, and so on. It's all linked together. So the point I want to make here is that we're all members of one body, particularly powerful because it is, as if priest is implying that we are all one big body, people together, all dependent on each other. In the same way that our physical bodies have organs that are dependent. So it's that the organs are dependent on each other, but then we're dependent on them. In the same way that our physical bodies have organs that are dependent on each other, and then we, as humans, are dependent on let's take that down a bit. 20. It's a bit bigger. There we are. In the same way that our physical bodies have organs that are dependent on each other, and that we as humans are dependent on these organs, society is dependent on everybody. Okay, we are all interlinked with each other, and if we are to be a successful be a successful flourishing society according to priesthood, we must live our lives as if we are all one. Our actions have consequences, and this bit here about the bodies and the organs being dependent on each other, that is a grade 6 type comment. It could be a grade 9 comment if it was explained in a bit more detail, but we might get to that a little bit later. But the point here is that every bit of our body is dependent on each other. So here it's like it's not our action of, it is the action of consequences, and in the same way that our bodies rely on in the same way that our bodies rely on the connection between our organs to survive, society also relies on how people connect with each other. Okay. So that might be here a sort of grade 6 answer. So it doesn't differ too much from the grade 4 answer, but what it does do is all of this is extra. This is all analysis. I'll colour code that in green. This is all analysis, you see. So it just gives us that sort of that grade 6 band. So you've got point, you've got your evidence, you've got a lot more detail than you have in the grade 1 piece. And then what you do is you step up to another part of the quotation. We are members of one body. You evaluate that it's particularly powerful, and then you go on to explain why. Okay. Then, if we turn our attention to the grade 7 to 9 piece, I will move that and that, so I've got more room. Now, obviously, grade 7 to 9 is going to be a lot longer because you need that level of detail, but the premise is the same. There we go. Okay. So I'll take that off green. Now, what we need to do is we just need to tighten up and bring in more detail. Okay. So we've analysed essentially 2 quotes really, and that's a bit of detail on the second one. Okay. I might go back and talk a little bit about this idea. We are responsible for each other. Oops. Oh, that's so annoying. So what I might do is I've said furthermore here. Where are we? There. So I've added that on, but now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to this bit and link the quotes together. This is a sentiment that is echoed in we are responsible for each other. Priestley, as the inspector, clearly state socialist views. We, as a society, are closely interlinked and connected, and we must take a social responsibility, everybody within that society. Okay, now you might go back to the body idea here in the same way that because obviously the brain is dependent on oxygen, the lungs are dependent on oxygen, the heart is dependent on oxygen, in the same way that the body is dependent on oxygen and other nutrients. Let me just read that again back through my head. In the same way that the body is dependent on Actually, I might get rid of that specifically. In the same way that the body is dependent. Okay, let's change it around slightly. Not the body. In the same way that we as humans must take responsibility for. So I'm continuing this idea of the body. So we must, as humans, we must take responsibility for what we eat. You know, our diet, our exercise, and our own health. Society must take responsibility. So the idea is that as humans we take responsibility for our diet, our exercise, our health, and then our organs. Society must take responsibility for its organs, the people within it. So imagine like society is this big human being and all the different parts of it, they're all like society essentially, and they're all working together in the same. The body is dependent on all of its organs working together, being able to function, just like society is. This is society, especially a socialist society, is dependent on its members. Okay, I'm going to just have to move that slightly thinner. Okay, so here you were still, that's a quote, so I'll highlight that. We are, so this was the 5 to 6 finished at greater good, right, which is there. So all of this has been added on for the grade 7 to 9 piece. And all it does is it fleshes out and gives a little bit more detail behind the heart, not the heart, sorry, the body metaphor. So what I might do, and one thing that I think is missing is probably a bit more specific context. Okay, so I might go back and I might look at the points on here. And I'm going to take that over, I'm going to change it, but this is an example of me showing you that in the answers you're not reinventing the wheel, you're using what you already know. As a socialist, Priest was interested in our responsibility for our own actions and our collective responsibility to society. Firmly believed that to take care. Get rid of that there. Then I might go back and have a look if there's anything else I can include. I might include the bit about him fighting in the war. In fact, I I might use that bit actually, not all of it because it's quite long, but some of it. He firmly believed that society should involve us all taking a shared responsibility of each other. Priestley uses the inspector and his final speech to shine. It's not. He doesn't really use it to shine a light on, but he uses it to highlight the need. Also, at a particularly critical point in time, which had a need for shared responsibility. And Inspector Goole was first formed after World War II. Was first reformed in Britain in 1946. After World War II, with the increasing power of capitalism in the Western world. Quality of life was alone Priestley believed that both rich and poor benefit focused on looking out to one another. Therefore, the inspector's final functions as a reminder to the audience to look after each other and adopt a collective shared responsibility for the rest of society. He wanted to guide the audience away from making the mistakes that the Burlings in the play. Okay, so I'll make that bigger, and you can see it. That is so that's the difference between what ended at a grade 6 paragraph at greater good, adding on all of this. So you can see it is a bit more detailed with regards to this idea of the body in society. There's a bit more of an understanding as to what that final speech is being used for, and there's context at the end and a link to Priestley's intention. So if I go back to the Pearl, we've done all of these, and we've done them all in detail as well. So it's not just kind of like glossed over. So I'll just quickly talk you back through these. If you don't need to be talked back through, you can skip this bit. But if you want to talk through this, then you can have a little listen. So grade 1 to 2, we've got a point, we've got a quote, we've got some very, very basic grade 1 analysis there. Okay. Grade 3 to 4, we've got the point, the evidence, we've got the grade 1 analysis, and then we go on a little bit more to talk about the final speech. We've got the mention of socialism. We've got a bit more a zoom in on we here, and at the end we talk about a need for socialism and World War II and a fear of Britain. Okay, so that's kind of an understanding there of what socialism is. Then on grade 5 to 6, we take that a little bit further because we change some of the language that's been used, and we zoom in on another part of the quotation, which is this bit here, and we talk about what that suggests to us. And here we go on to do this really nice analysis about the difference between, like the similarities between society and physical body. And then for grades 7 to 9, we wrap that up a lot more, explaining, as you can see, great good finishes there. And there, it goes on to zoom in onto the last part of the quotation. So we've done every bit of the quote in detail, and we've spoken about collective responsibility, which is there. Priestley's use of the inspector's final speech to highlight the need to do this. We've got context, we've got quality of life, and at the end we've got a really nice bit to finish it about the inspector's speech functioning as a reminder to the audience of the need at the time in which they were, after World War II, to adopt more collective shared responsibility. Okay, so I'll leave that there. If you want to pause it now, you can do. You will have a copy of this on the slide if you need it anyway. But if you wanted to make any notes now, you can pause and do that now. Okay. So now what your task is to choose a quotation. Okay, that can be any quotation from here. It can be a quotation from here. Or if you've watched the Mr. Bruff video, or you know of any other quotations that you've got in mind, you can do that as well. I want you to follow Whichever one is for your target grade, and I want you to try and include as much information as you can for that, the same way that I have. Okay. I want you to write a detailed analytical paragraph in response to this question. How does Priestley present the character of Inspector Goole, and how does he use him to put across his views on society? Okay, so what I'd do first of all, depending on what your target grade is I'd have a look again at the analysis that corresponds. If you're grade 3 to 4, you can have a look at that. That's the minimum that you're aiming for. Yeah, and you can use your literary critic sheet to help you do that. Okay, how does Priestley present the character of Inspector Goole? How does he use him to put across his views on society? Some further guidance for you. Use your Write Like a Literary Critic sheet, which will be attached to the PowerPoint. Use the range of keywords that you've learned at the start of the lesson. You must explain, explain, and explain, because therefore, so as they're all useful words to sort of layer on your analysis and go that extra mile with regards to the detail. Okay, remember Pearl, point, evidence, analysis, response, which is your audience reaction. Language zoom, link to context, link to Priestley, link to question. Okay, the L's can be done in any order as long as they make sense, but the link to Priestley and the link to context are very important. Okay, if you look back at this, it's that link to context and Priestley at the end here that really helps secure that grade 7 to 9 analysis. If you have a go at doing that now, you want to spend about half an hour on that, and you want to submit that as a separate Word document or on this slide somewhere. I'll make a slide there now. Your answer, and I will just copy the question so that you've got it. So then what I'll do is I'll leave that there for you to write in, just in case it doesn't let you make another document on Teams. Okay, so if you want to pause now, have a go at that. Don't forget that if you do get stuck, you can email your English literature teacher or post it on the Teams chat, or you can email me if you want to, and I can help where possible. Pause now and have a go at that task, please. Okay, so hopefully you've had a chance to do that. No more than half an hour, hopefully, because this should only take 2 hours in total. So what I don't want is I don't want you sort of spending hours and hours on this. It's just about practicing the skills in readiness for the exam. Step 5, this should be. I think I've modelled these up. It's very annoying. Yeah. So this should actually be step 4, but I'm not going to go and change it. I'll change it for the final thing. What I want you to do is, for Inspector Goole, another revision document as you've been doing for all the other characters, so that you can have them in a nice, easy, locatable place next year. I want you to think about key quotations for the Inspector. I want you to think about why he's in the play, lots and lots of reasons there. I want you to, spell a mistake, think about how the Inspector guides us as an audience and how he's asking the questions about the Berlins, but actually he's asking the questions about us. I want you to think about keywords linked to his character, my mistake there, why you've chosen them, and a bit of information on what collective responsibility is, because I think that is something for the Inspector that you can't avoid in any exam question. So that's why it's so important that that is in there. What I'd like to do if you get stuck is to use these websites on here. You've got Spark Notes website, which is really, really interesting and useful for Inspector Goole, and a Grades Fixer website. Again, it's got quite a lot of quotes on, so if you're struggling for quotations, then those are the places to go. 20-25 minutes on that should be enough for you to finish that. If you want to give that a go now, please, and come back to the PowerPoint when you've done it. Okay, welcome back. So that concludes this week's video lesson on an Inspector Calls, specifically for Inspector Goole. Okay, we hopefully have been able to understand how Priestley presents Inspector Goole. You've done your analysis. We've modelled a grade 1 up to grade 7, 8, 9 analysis. You have analysed evidence from the play and the ideas within that evidence. and you've also learnt some new key vocabulary that you can use to talk about the inspector. Now would be a really good time to look back at your first mind map and think about how many other things you could now add to it from the start of the lesson. And if you do that in a different pen, hopefully you'll be able to then see how useful this lesson has been in terms of adding more information to your existing knowledge. When this is uploaded onto Teams, you will have an essay, a sample essay response, just a paragraph that is different to this. Okay, but you can use both. I've just done it extra to help you in case you get a bit stuck. Thank you for listening, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your day.